Hello. Well, I decided to have a look at this new game, which is just been released on Steam as in sort of an early release, early access, and it is called Combat Air Patrol 2. And the reason I am looking at this game is because I saw that Correa had downloaded it and he was having a look at it. And I thought to myself, well, if Correa is having a look at it, it must be good. So let's have a little look. Now, I've already played this for about an hour or so, very briefly. I set up the controls, set up the graphics, and had a wee fly around in the Harrier, which you can see in this shot here. First impressions are not great, but be aware that I am comparing this to a full-blooded sim such as DCS, or a full-blooded sort of combat environment for warbirds such as Cliffs of Dover. So my expectations are very high, and I will be approaching this, I guess, from the perspective of full realism flight simming. So as a early disclaimer, let me just say that this is not a full-bodied flight sim. This is very much an entry-level flying game focusing on jets. So I will try to be conscious of that as we go through, but we'll just have to see what happens here. Okay, so first of all, you'll notice from the splash screens that's showing here in the menu that graphically it's not great. You can see the way the lighting is currently modeled. When the sun is directly on something, it's incredibly washed out. You can see these cloud textures, the particles sort of effects that you normally see in clouds and explosions and that sort of thing are quite poor. And the overall texture quality is not ideal, but we'll get into some more detail. The sound, I've also noticed, is very poor. I don't know if you can hear it here, it's just intermittent. You can see the flames on that ship just then, they look really bad. Actually, this menu screen is a good example of how unpolished this game currently is. This constant flicking between all these scenes, it's really disruptive. And I just wish it was still and it was silent, because it constantly flicks between sound and visual, and it's really disturbing. The sound is bad. There's a very poor sort of heavy rock tune going on in the background, and it sounds like it was probably recorded with a MIDI sampler, with a MIDI drum kit. It's sort of, yeah, it's the kind of thing it's the kind of music that people think pilots would listen to, if that makes any sense. It's your stereotypical thrashy guitar, I'm going to war type music. All the pilots I knew in the military, we all woke up and listened to disco at first thing in the morning. And that was in the late 90s. Okay, so criticisms of the music aside, let's have a quick look at the options. I've got the graphics turned up as high as I can get them. And so really this visuals that we see, they've got no excuse. I'm expecting this to look very good with full graphical fidelity. The music stopped. Got to the end of the track. So much more pleasant when that music stops. Control wise, by the way, I do have the audio set very low, 20%. That music is slightly better, but it's a bit sort of, it's very MIDI. I really think the music was written on MIDI, and it's not actually a recording of live musicians. Anyway, back to the controls. When I first loaded these controls, I noticed that a whole lot of them were set to Gamepad 1 or Gamepad 2. So be warned that it looks like this game has been set up for arcade gamers. It is not set up for simmers. So you can also see there's a very limited set of flight controls. It's basically pitch, roll, and yaw, trim, gear and brakes, flaps. That's it. Going to the engine controls, it's basically throttle, and then the the nozzles, the thruster nozzles, obviously the Harrier, and then there's a couple of fuel-related things. So, oh, that's interesting. We've got an inverted. That's cool. Is it? Is it cool? And then we've got some avionics, which is really just cycling between things and HUD mode. So it's not really a huge. The radio messages are all just actual. It's not really radio controls. It's I want to land, I want to take off. So, okay. Anyway, let's just say that. Request to launch. Let's put L in there. Just. In case we decide to do a carrier launch. So really not detailed controls, nothing like you would see in DCS, which has pages and pages and pages of controls, and of course nothing like you would see even with the Warbirds control systems for the simpler, in inverted commas, World War II aircraft in the IL-2 series of games. Anyway, that's my impression of the sort of setup. We'll go and do a quick start mission. And I'm just going to go straight into this. Let's just do the landing one. And we're not actually going to attempt a landing. I haven't done that yet. But we'll basically just fly around. So here's more of these quite jarring cutscene sequences, which I really don't like. Now in the pre-flight there's a few options you can change. Nothing too ridiculous. There is a turbulence setting, which is quite nice. But we're not really going to go into detail about any of this. I am... Okay. I'm just going to go play mission, so begin mission, and we'll have a look at what it's like to actually be in the aircraft. Okay, so we've got some, what I suspect is supposed to be forested landscape textures beneath me. Track IR does not work, by the way. I'm just going to throttle up to about 50% throttle, and I'm using the mouse to zoom in here. Am I using the mouse to zoom in? I was using them out. There it is. Click with the left button to zoom in. The landscape textures are very, very basic. They are, I would say, very low pixel count. In fact, you can already see heavy pixelation, and there's almost no vegetation down there. The vegetation is very sparse, so they are very light on graphical quality. The ocean, you can see the tiling of the textures. I really wish Track IR was enabled. I do notice that when you roll the pilot, or when you pull back, for example, when you manipulate the axes of the aircraft, the pilot does naturally move his head slightly. But you can neither choose for it to happen, nor can you exaggerate it or change it. It's basically not manipulable in any direction. But it's a slightly nice touch, but I would much rather have physical control over where the pilot is looking. Looking at the cockpit textures, you can see it's fairly blocky for a brand new game. That is a straight line, that's a straight line, that's a straight line, that's a straight line. So this cockpit canopy is made up of a series of about 15 hand-width straight lines. It's not a curved piece of metal. And the rest of the textures reflect that approach. The frame rates are incredibly high, but that is to be expected from something that has... So you can see the graphical, or the lack of graphical quality there. If you just go back to that piece of video, that bit of coastline I went past, you can see the buildings popping in and out, and I'm probably 500 yards away from these buildings. The graphical textures are popping in and out. The buildings themselves are very poor. They're basically just boxes. So overall, the graphical quality is extremely low. I would expect this kind of graphical quality on a game I play on my phone, not something I play on a full 27 or 32 or however big people's monitors are, inch monitor. There you go, look at that sort of really grubby transition between the land and the water there. It's not very impressive at all. They may be going after the VR market with this, which is why they've sacrificed real high graphical quality for frame rate. That may be an interesting approach for trying to target VR, because now that's really starting to take off with flight simming. Let's just have a look at that runway down there. Is that just black? I think it is. Yeah, I don't think there's any real texturing on that runway. It's just black. So they're a long way off being complete in terms of graphics. I don't know if this signals their general approach to how they want this game to look. Um, I'm not sure if I should just say, well, it's work in progress and all these textures will be updated, or whether we should take some kind of signal from that. It's always the problem with looking at something that's early access and trying to get a feel for it, is that you're never quite sure how much of the final product you're looking at. So that's a little bit about the graphical quality. I've noticed on the sound side, both in the menus and in game, that the frequency range appears to be very, very squashed into a narrow band. I can't hear anything at all down in the LF range. Down below about 200 or 300 hertz, it seems completely barren. And there's also very little up in the real HF stuff, up above about 15, 18. It seems like all the frequencies are squashed into a band of about 500 to 1400 hertz. I may run a recording through a spectrum analyzer just to see how broad it is, but to the sort of naked ear, it sounds like it's really squashed into a narrow band. So, not a great level of audio range. Flight model, well, to be honest, I can't actually talk about the flight model because I have absolutely no idea how a Harrier should fly. And to make matters worse, I've never really had much experience flying jets in flight sims. My love is for piston engine warbirds, and so I don't really know if this is behaving anywhere near how a Harrier should behave. What I did notice, though, is that it appears to be very sluggish. Now, that could be entirely the way you would expect a Harrier to operate, but that's full left aileron deflection, full right aileron deflection. Now I shall apply a full elevator back. It appears to have an incredibly slow rotation. I don't know if that's normal, though. So really, that's not a criticism. It's just an observation. But the word slow there could be entirely misplaced. It could be accurate. One thing I did notice, now if I apply left aileron and then release the control surface, so I'm going left on and release, it continues to roll in that direction with some momentum for quite an extended period of time. Released, I mean, it just continues to roll and roll and roll. It's got a very, very slow sort of momentum arrest. Now, once again, that could be realistic to the Harrier. Certainly, it feels like it makes for very imprecise flying. I feel like I can't fly this aircraft in the direction where I want to fly it. Maybe there's some kind of flight assist that isn't enabled, but the control setup leads me to believe that that doesn't exist. So for the moment, I can only assume that that is intentional on behalf of the developers, and I don't like it. But it may be realistic, in which case fine. The other thing I've noticed is that things like sun glare don't really exist. There's no real sun blindness. And there is a strange white glow on the horizon that follows the horizon around in a 360-degree circle. So all the way around, there's this bright glow on the horizon. All of the textures essentially fade to white. The only place you can not see it is if you're looking through the glass of the HUD here. You can actually see the horizon. But when you're not looking through the glass, you get that glow. And it actually looks okay through the glass. So that's a better representation of the horizon for me, especially when the sun's in the other direction. But when I'm looking over here through the cockpit glass, the whole thing's just completely whited out. It seems like a fairly cheap attempt to get around the abrupt horizon problem that you often see in flight sims. But, I don't know. Graphical-wise, I'm not impressed. Okay, so that's my first impression of this. I probably will do a couple more videos. I'd like to maybe get the hang of takeoff and landings on carriers. Oh, there's a strange seam in the textures just flicking through there. I also might see what sort of campaign they currently have. Correa mentioned that they were planning on building a dynamic single-player campaign, which he was quite looking forward to. So I may have a crack at that if and when it's out. Overall, I would say this is not a game for experienced simmers. If you are into high levels of realism and graphical fidelity, sound, you like the adrenaline rush of being as close to the real thing as you can get in your own home, this is not for you. This is probably a reasonable recommendation for someone who's never really got into flight simming. Ugh, I shouldn't really use the word flight simming. Flying gaming, and wants to just have a crack at it and hasn't got the money to spend on rudder pedals, proper flight controls, track IR, that kind of stuff. Really, I would rather suggest that this belongs on a phone and not on a PC, but I may be going a little bit too far there. Anyway, that's Combat Air Patrol 2 as far as I can tell at the moment. I may have another little look at this, and I suspect Correa may have a slightly different impression of this game. My casual conversations with him suggested that he was slightly more positive about it than I am. But anyway, we shall see. I'll put a link to Correa's YouTube channel below. Check out if he puts something up about this, and then maybe that will provide another viewpoint on this game. Okay, well, as usual, good luck everyone, happy hunting, and I'll probably see you next back in Cliffs of Dover.